The lights in the tribunal chamber were cold and blue. 7 species sat in a curved row behind a long table made of some dark metal that seemed to drink in the light. Their forms were different from one another. Some had scales. Some had skin that changed color. One was made mostly of a gas held inside a containment suit. But they all shared the same expression, or what passed for expressions on their alien faces. They were curious. They were afraid. They wanted to understand. In the center of the room, alone on a raised platform, sat Commandant of the Empire. His body was covered in a hard shell that looked like dark green armor, but it was not armor. It was his skin, his exoskeleton, the natural protection that his species had evolved over millions of years. That shell had once been beautiful. Now it was covered in burns and scratches that would never fully heal. His left antenna was missing, cut clean at the base, and the wound had been sealed with medical foam that was already turning yellow. Had once commanded 3,000 warriors. He had conquered 11 worlds for the Empire. He had never known defeat. Now he sat before strangers and tried to explain how a single human colony had broken his army in 12 days. The chief tribunal member, a creature called a who looked like a tall insect wrapped in silk robes, leaned forward. Its voice came through the translation matrix as a series of calm, measured tones. It asked to begin from the moment of planetary insertion. It asked him to leave nothing out. His mandibles clicked together. The translation matrix rendered this as a sound of tired acknowledgement. The planet was called New Hokkaido by the humans, he said. It was a small world, mostly forests and mountains, with a population of perhaps 2 million. The fleet had destroyed its orbital defenses in the first hour. They had burned its 3 largest cities from space. By the time's battalion made planetfall, the humans should have been finished, broken, ready to surrender or die. The landing zone was a valley surrounded by dense trees. Remembered thinking that it was a good location, easy to defend, clear sight lines to the forest edge. His soldiers established a perimeter within minutes. They set up sensor stations and patrol routes. They sent scouts into the trees. Everything proceeded according to doctrine. They had done this many times before. They knew how to pacify a primitive world. The first night was quiet. Too quiet, realized now, but at the time he had thought nothing of it. The humans were hiding. That was expected. Prey always hid from predators. The disappearances began on the second night. Paused here. His remaining antenna twitched back and forth, a sign of distress that the translation matrix did not bother to translate. The tribunal waited in silence. Private was the first, continued. He was on sentry duty at the northern edge of the camp. His was being monitored by the command post, a steady rhythm of life indicators that showed he was awake and alert. At approximately 3 hours after sundown, that rhythm simply stopped. There was no spike of fear, no surge of combat hormones. One moment was alive. The next moment he was not. The patrol that went to investigate found nothing. No body, no blood, no sign of struggle, just an empty patch of ground where a soldier had been standing. They searched for an hour. They found no tracks, no evidence, nothing at all. It was as if it had simply ceased to exist. One of the tribunal members, a being with too many eyes arranged in a spiral pattern on its face, interrupted to ask about sensor data. Surely they had thermal imaging, motion detectors, acoustic monitoring equipment. His mandibles made a sound that the translation matrix rendered as bitter laughter. Yes, he said, they had all of those things, the finest military technology in the Empire. It did not matter. He explained. The humans knew their equipment. They knew every frequency, every sensitivity threshold, every gap in coverage. They moved through those gaps like water flowing through cracks in stone. When they needed to hide their heat signatures, they buried themselves in mud and ash until they were invisible to thermal imaging. When they needed to avoid motion detectors, they moved so slowly that the sensors classified them as wind or settling debris. When they needed silence, They achieved a level of quiet that had not believed possible for any living creature. By the end of that first week, 47 soldiers had vanished. Some were found eventually, their bodies hidden in places that seemed impossible for a killer to reach without being detected. One was discovered inside a collapsed building, 200 meters from the nearest patrol route. His throat had been opened by something sharp. The wound was precise, almost surgical. He had not had time to scream. Others were never found at all. The tribunal chief asked about engagement. Had the knot fought back? Santana trembled. They had tried, he said. Every time a soldier disappeared, patrols were sent to search. Every time a body was found, trackers were dispatched to follow any trail. The results were always the same. Nothing. No enemy to fight. No target to shoot. Just darkness and silence and the growing certainty that something was watching from the shadows. He described the moment when the fear truly began to spread through his forces. It was the 9th night. A patrol of 6 soldiers was moving through the forest edge, their weapons ready, their sensors active. They were experienced warriors, veterans of multiple campaigns. They were not afraid of the dark. The point man stopped. He had seen something, a shape that did not belong, a shadow that was somehow darker than the shadows around it. He raised his weapon. His did the same. The shape did not move. It simply stood there, perhaps 30 meters away, watching them with eyes they could not see. The patrol leader gave the order to fire. Every soldier in that patrol opened up with full automatic plasma fire. The night turned white with muzzle flashes. Trees exploded into flames. The air itself seemed to burn with the intensity of their barrage. When the firing stopped and their vision cleared, the shape was gone. So were 2 of their soldiers. Let that statement hang in the air. The tribunal members exchanged glances that transcended species boundaries. They were all thinking the same thing. How was such a thing possible? The commandant continued. After that night, his soldiers refused to patrol in groups smaller than 20. They refused to venture more than 100 meters from the main camp. They kept their weapons raised and ready at all times, shooting at every sound, every movement, every shadow that seemed wrong. It did not help. The humans adapted. They became bolder. They started leaving messages. A helmet placed on a sharpened stick where the morning patrol would find it. Inside, nothing but a pair of severed antennae. The antennae belonged to a soldier who had disappeared 2 nights before. His body was never recovered. Communication equipment left where it would be found, somehow hacked despite encryption, playing back recordings of their own transmissions, their positions, their supply levels, their increasingly desperate requests for orbital support that the fleet refused to provide. The humans wanted to know that they were listening, that they understood everything, that there was no secret, no plan, no hope that they had not already accounted for. Reached the end of his account of the first phase. His voice, filtered through the translation matrix, had grown heavy with exhaustion and something else. Something that might have been shame in a creature capable of feeling such things. He told the tribunal that by the 10th day, his army of 3,000 had been reduced to less than 2,000 combat-effective soldiers, not through major battles, not through bombing runs or artillery strikes, through attrition, through fear, through the slow, patient, merciless hunting of his soldiers 1 by 1 and 2 by 2, every single night without fail. He had seen the enemy exactly once, a shape separating from the darkness, moving with terrible slowness, its face hidden behind equipment that made it look less like a living thing and more like death given physical form. He had ordered his guards to fire. They had fired. When the light faded, the shape was gone. So was the soldier standing next to him. Fell silent. His testimony for now was complete. But the tribunal had more witnesses waiting, and the full horror of New Hokkaido had not yet been revealed. The second witness was called Prelate, and she was not like the at all. Where Commandant was hard and angular, built for war, was soft and flowing. her body covered in skin that shimmered and changed color with her emotions. She was a species known throughout the collective for their spiritual traditions and their role as neutral observers in conflicts between other civilizations. Had been embedded with the forces on New Hokkaido. Her mission was to document the conquest for the collective's historical archives. She was supposed to record a routine subjugation, another world brought into the Empire's fold. Instead, she had witnessed something that had changed her understanding of what was possible in warfare. As she took her place on the witness platform, her skin flickered through colors that the translation matrix struggled to interpret. Fear, confusion, a deep and abiding sense of wrongness. The tribunal members watched her with growing unease. The chief asked her to describe her observations, was silent for a long moment, her colors shifting and flowing like oil on water. She began by explaining that she had observed many species at war. They kept extensive records of military conflicts throughout the known galaxy. In all of those records, spanning thousands of years and hundreds of species, she had never encountered anything like what the humans had done on New Hokkaido. It was not the killing, she said. All species killed in war. It was not even the efficiency of the killing, though that was remarkable. It was the understanding. The humans understood fear. They did not simply kill soldiers. They unmade the army as a fighting force, piece by piece, using fear as their primary weapon. Every action they took, every death they caused, every message they left behind was calculated to achieve a specific psychological effect. They were not just fighting a war. They were conducting an experiment in terror, and they knew exactly what they were doing. Described the progression she had observed. In the early days, the disappearances were random, unpredictable. Soldiers vanished from different locations at different times with no apparent pattern. This randomness was itself a weapon. They could not predict where the next attack would come. They could not prepare. They could only wait and wonder and fear. Then the patterns changed. The humans began targeting specific individuals, squad leaders, communications specialists, soldiers who showed courage under pressure. Anyone who might serve as a rallying point for the others was marked for death. The message was clear. Leadership would not be tolerated. Standing out would get you killed. The safest thing to do was nothing at all. One of the tribunal members, a creature that resembled a large crustacean with crystalline growths on its shell, asked how the humans selected their targets. How did they know which soldiers to prioritize? Skin flickered with colors that meant uncertainty mixed with speculation. She believed the humans had been watching long before they began killing, studying, learning the social dynamics of the force, identifying the soldiers who mattered most and those who could be safely ignored. This was another thing that made them terrifying, their patience. The humans did not rush. They took their time. They gathered information. They waited for the perfect moment to strike, and when that moment came, they struck without mercy. She described an incident that occurred on the seventh night. A young officer named had been rallying his platoon, keeping their spirits up, organizing them into effective defensive positions. He was good at his job. His soldiers respected him. Under his leadership, his section of the camp had remained calm while others descended into paranoia. On the seventh night, disappeared. His body was found the next morning, positioned in the exact center of his platoon's sleeping area. He had been killed silently, sometime during the night, while 30 soldiers slept around him. Not one of them had heard anything. Not one of them had woken. The message was unmistakable. No one is safe. Not even surrounded by allies. Not even in the heart of the camp. The humans could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime they chose. After, no other officers tried to rally their soldiers. Continued her testimony. She spoke of how the humans varied their tactics, never attacking the same way twice. Some nights brought the silent disappearances. Other nights brought sudden violence, coordinated strikes from multiple directions that lasted exactly 90 seconds before dissolving back into darkness. The soldiers never knew what to expect. They could not adapt because there was nothing consistent to adapt to. The 90-second attacks were particularly devastating. Had witnessed one of them from the command post. The humans emerged from the forest at 4 points simultaneously, firing weapons that made almost no sound, moving with a speed and coordination that seemed rehearsed to perfection. In 90 seconds, they killed 37 soldiers. Then they were gone, vanishing back into the darkness before they could mount an effective response. 90 seconds. Repeated the number. It was not chosen randomly. It was exactly long enough to cause maximum casualties while remaining too short for the defenders to organize. The humans had calculated everything, down to the precise duration of their attacks. The spiralide tribunal member asked about countermeasures. Surely the Empire's soldiers had tried to adapt. Colors shifted to something the Matrix translated as grim acknowledgement. Yes, she said. They tried. They established larger perimeters. They increased patrol sizes. They set up overlapping sensor coverage and redundant guard posts. They did everything their training told them to do. None of it mattered. The humans simply changed their approach. When the perimeter expanded, they found gaps. When patrol sizes increased, they waited for the patrols to pass and struck the camp directly. When sensor coverage improved, they adapted their camouflage techniques to defeat it. And then came the night when they did not attack at all. Describe this as the moment when the army truly broke. Commandant, desperate for any kind of certainty, had ordered his remaining forces to form a massive defensive perimeter. Every soldier standing shoulder to shoulder, weapons raised, facing outward into the darkness. They would wait for dawn. They would not move, would not sleep, would not let their guard down for a single moment. The humans let them. All night they stood in their formation. All night they stared into shadows that stared back. They heard sounds that might have been movement or might have been nothing. They saw shapes that might have been enemies or might have been trees. No one attacked. No one died. The humans simply watched and waited. By morning, 11 soldiers had suffered complete psychological collapse. They screamed, they dropped their weapons, they tried to run in random directions until their comrades restrained them. One tore at his own eyes, shrieking that he could see them watching, always watching, never looking away. The humans had discovered something that many species did not understand. Fear of death could be worse than death itself. Anticipation of horror could inflict more damage than horror. By not attacking, they had proven that they controlled the pace of the war. They decided when soldiers died. They could only wait for the decision to be made. The tribunal chief asked the question that everyone wanted answered. How many human soldiers were responsible for this campaign? Skin went through a complex sequence of colors before settling on something the Matrix rendered as hollow amusement. Based on all evidence gathered during the engagement, she said, based on the limited sensor readings and the rare visual and the analysis of tactical patterns, the collective's intelligence division had reached a conclusion. The army had been hunted by a unit of approximately 12 humans. Perhaps fewer. The tribunal chamber fell silent. Somewhere in the back of the room, one of the observers made a sound that might have been a gasp or might have been a prayer, said nothing more. Her colors slowly faded to a dull gray that meant exhaustion and completed testimony. The humans had taken an army of 3,000 elite warriors and reduced it to a broken, terrified mob using nothing but 12 soldiers in 12 days. The collective had one more witness waiting, and this witness was human. Admiral Wei entered the tribunal chamber without ceremony. She was a small woman by human standards, her hair gray and cut short, her face lined with age and experience. She wore a simple uniform with no decorations except for a single insignia on her collar that none of the alien observers recognized. Unlike the previous witnesses, did not take her place on the raised platform. She stood at ground level, facing the tribunal directly, her hands clasped behind her back. Her posture was relaxed but attentive, the stance of someone who was comfortable in her own skin and had nothing to prove. The chief studied her for a long moment before speaking. It noted that the admiral's presence was voluntary. Humanity had not joined the collective and had no obligation to explain her military's actions to this body. Why had she chosen to appear? His answer was simple and direct. She was there because she believed the species of the collective deserved to understand what had happened on New Hokkaido, not to threaten them, not to intimidate them, simply to explain so that there would be no misunderstandings in the future. The tribunal accepted this explanation and invited her to proceed. Began by addressing the obvious question that hung over the entire proceeding. The soldiers who had fought on New Hokkaido were not superhuman. They were not genetic modifications or products of some secret enhancement program. They were ordinary men and women who had extensive training in a particular kind of warfare. The crystalline crustacean interrupted. Surely ordinary beings could not accomplish what the previous witnesses had described. The level of stealth, the precision, the psychological manipulation, those things required more than simple training. Nodded as if she had expected this objection. She asked the tribunal to consider something. Among all the species represented in this chamber, how many had achieved through physical superiority? How many had claws or shells or size or strength that allowed them to dominate their home worlds? She paused, letting the question sink in. Then she continued. Humans had none of those things. On Earth, the planet where humanity evolved, humans were not the strongest creatures. They were not the fastest. They did not have claws or armor or venom. For most of their evolutionary history, they were prey. Things with sharp teeth and fast legs hunted them through forests and across plains. But humans did not accept their role as prey. They developed tools to make up for their lack of natural weapons. They developed language to coordinate their efforts. They developed patience, the ability to wait and watch and learn, because charging headlong at predators was a good way to die. And eventually, over thousands of generations, they developed something else. They developed the ability to hunt the things that hunted them. Explained, humans are what scientists call persistence predators. Their bodies are designed not for speed but for endurance. They can walk and run for distances that most creatures cannot match. Their ancestors learned to track prey for days, following it relentlessly until exhaustion brought it down. They learned that patience could defeat speed, that intelligence could defeat strength. When humans faced predators larger and more dangerous than themselves, they applied the same principles. They watched. They learned. They found weaknesses. They struck when conditions favored them and retreated when conditions did not. They turned every advantage their enemies possessed into a disadvantage through planning and patience and an absolute refusal to fight fairly. The soldiers on New Hokkaido were simply doing what humans had always done. They were hunting a superior force, using techniques their species had refined over 100,000 years of survival. One of the tribunal members, a being composed mostly of gas, asked about the psychological tactics, the terror, the deliberate cultivation of fear. Was that also part of human heritage? Was silent for a moment before answering. Yes, she said it was. Humans understood fear because they had spent most of their existence being afraid. They knew what it felt like to lie awake at night listening for sounds in the darkness. They knew the particular horror of being hunted by something they could not see. And they had learned, over all those generations, how to turn that knowledge into a weapon. The humans on New Hokkaido did not simply kill soldiers. They created an environment of maximum uncertainty. They made sure that every shadow could contain death, that every moment of silence could be the last moment of life. They used this own military training against them because that training was designed for a different kind of warfare. They knew how to fight enemies who announced themselves. They did not know how to fight shadows. turned to address Commandant directly for the first time. The officer had remained silent throughout her testimony, his remaining antenna completely still. She told him that his soldiers had never had a chance, not because they were inferior warriors, but because they were fighting the wrong war. They expected a battle. The humans gave them a hunt. The chief asked the crucial question. Was this a demonstration? Was humanity sending a message to the collective about what would happen to anyone who threatened human territory? Consider the question carefully before answering. Yes and no, she said. Humanity was not interested in conquest. The human species had enough problems of its own without trying to control other worlds. They did not seek to expand their territory or subjugate other civilizations. They simply wanted to live in peace and raise their children and build their futures. But the colony worlds were humanity's children. New Hokkaido and all the other settlements scattered across human space were filled with ordinary people trying to make ordinary lives. Those people were under human protection. Anyone who threatened them would learn what they had learned. Paused, and then spoke the words that would be quoted throughout the collective for decades to come. Humans do not roar challenges or display bright colors before battle, she said. They do not announce their presence or engage in ritual combat. When humans decide that something must die, they simply appear in the darkness, do what must be done, and vanish, leaving behind only stories told by those fortunate enough to survive. The tribunal chamber was completely silent. Offered one final statement. Humanity extended friendship to any species that approached in peace. Trade, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, all of these things were possible. Humanity had no quarrel with the collective or any of its member species. But if anyone else attempted what they had attempted, if anyone else bombarded human cities and killed human civilians and tried to conquer human worlds, they should understand one thing clearly. The soldiers of New Hokkaido would be waiting. The admiral turned and walked out of the chamber without another word. She did not look back. In the weeks that followed, military doctrines across the collective were quietly revised. Fleet deployments were adjusted. Intelligence services began intensive studies of human psychology and warfare. And in the navigation databases of every species with spacefaring capability, the coordinates of human space were marked with a new designation. Do not engage. Commandant eventually returned to space, where he spent the rest of his life writing detailed analyses of his experience on New Hokkaido. His works were required reading at every military academy in the empire. Prelate returned to the and added her testimony to their historical archives. The entry was classified at the highest level, available only to senior leaders who needed to understand what humans were capable of when provoked. And somewhere in human space, on a small colony world called New Hokkaido that was slowly rebuilding itself from the ashes, 12 soldiers returned to their ordinary lives. They told no stories. They sought no recognition. They simply disappeared back into the civilian population, becoming once again the quiet neighbors and unremarkable citizens they had always been. Because that was what humans did. They looked like prey. They acted like prey. They built their homes and raised their families and went about their business in peace. But they were not prey. And any predator foolish enough to forget that would learn the truth in the most terrible way possible.